Hi everyone, Jonathan here, and today we're going to talk about CDK again. Last time we spoke, we were talking about how you can initialize a template from CDK, and we were using Typescript. And after you run a sample code, these are the files that they generate: the binary files, the CDK.out. CDK.out doesn't really exist. That's because I compiled code, but the library, the test, the git ignore, npm ignore, CDK, jest, whatsoever, the list goes down. I'm going to talk about how you can prepare for your deployments and what are these files are, right? Are these folders and files? How is it being structured so that you can use them and write code so that you can deploy infrastructure in AWS. So before I begin, let me just go to the library. Now I have some stuff that I deployed before. Essentially, you can see these are grayed out, and while this is the only stack, it doesn't really matter. But when you write code in here, it initializes what you want to deploy. Okay, and so it can be lambdas, it can be S3 buckets, it can be any infrastructure that exists in the AWS ecosystem. Go check the docs because it is just part of the list of stuff and services that they provide, right? So this is where you initialize with code on what you want to deploy in the AWS system, right? The next level is the binary files. This is where the actual execution goes on. Now that's because when you deploy stuff, especially for AWS infrastructure, there can be some dependencies which you want to deal with. For example, if you use S3 buckets and you want to pair it with a code build, right? You can deploy, you can execute it here, but you have to initialize it in the libraries, right? And the order of execution is actually defined in the binary. And so this code is being run while library files are being referenced from this file. You can see here, Yephira CDK demo stack comes from this library, and it goes from here on this level, right? Well, where my cursor is pointing to. So libraries are where you initialize what you want to deploy. Binary for a binary file like this, executes the order of what you want to deploy, and this matters especially if you are dealing with things that have dependencies and things that needs to go in order. Okay. So next up you have the test. Now this is the special juice that I would say, the special recipe to make things work well. CDK makes sure that you are testing what you are deploying right here. So you can definitely go into making sure that your inputs and outputs are the same, because once we go on to our other tutorials, you will realize that you can reference objects, infrastructure as objects within your binary. And especially here, let's say you have an S3 bucket you want to use for code build, but there is another service such as a lambda, right? And you want to reference the S3 object, which is your bucket, again to be used in lambda. That's where you can define the inputs and outputs for each objects here, and you can test some of these things in your test case, so that when you deploy, you're not deploying errant code. You can cross-check with your other developers, and you can manage your deployments as a team. So this is the secret juice. We'll not go through a lot of tests for our tutorials because you do need to know jest. You do need to know testing in JavaScript and TypeScript. But essentially, this is actually a very good component in CDK. Now, moving along, git ignore is pretty much just ignoring what kind of files you want for your git. npm, the same thing. Now, cdk.json, typically I don't touch this file because it tells the system how you should run the code here, and you can see that it's running this string here every time you do a deployment. Okay, so next up is your jest.config.js. Again, this is what I've been saying so far. You can actually use JavaScript testing or npm testing or TypeScript to test your deployment code. and it's pretty useful if you want to make sure that your team has a very good code design, right? Package-log is, this is just when you install npm modules. Again, this is a very JavaScript thing and a very Node.js thing, right? Package.json is these are the dependencies. I will be updating this this portion using some command lines because this deployment of CDK is old, and I will show you what you should do every time you deploy. Alright, and so this is my readme.md. This is again found in my repo, and of course here you have your TypeScript config. This is already generated for you. You don't really have to go into this to make changes. But if you are a wizard in TypeScript, definitely do your changes because it can help you to optimize stuff right here. So this is the layout of how the folders are made when you do your CDK init app language TypeScript. Every time you deploy, this is the kind of file structure that you will see. Alright, so without further ado, let's go into prepping your stuff. Now, before I begin, I need to update my CDK. So let me do a npm run. So you typically run npm run build CDK since right here, npm run build and CDK synth. Now you don't really need this stage dev and version. That's because I use this for my work in terms of context variables. Let me just remove that real quick, and let's just run that. And then it will say, okay, it will start to build. It will start to generate files. I think there is nothing to build because really there's nothing to build. I have nothing here to execute. Okay, so you can see that there's nothing deployable here. But what you do see here is newer version of CDK is available, 1.125. Now every time you deploy stuff, make sure that your CDK is at the latest version, because CDK updates very, very frequently, almost weekly updates. And you might be surprised if you accidentally install stuff, let's say a new module. You want to, today you didn't use SageMaker, and tomorrow you install the npm module for SageMaker. Your entire deployment cannot work because one of it is out of sync against the rest of your packages. So make sure you, every time you deploy, update your AWS CDK because it's just better. Otherwise you will meet deployment problems, and I have met deployment problems. So without further ado, let me just do a npm outdated. You can see what kind of files are being outdated. You can see this is quite a lot of them. So let me do an npm update. Okay. A pro tip is make sure that all of these things are wildcard up. Make sure that these things are updatable. Sometimes when you deploy or use the CDK template, they don't have this little what is this called? This little symbol right here. That little cap there, right? This indicates that you are allowing npm to make changes to the next stable version. So make sure that you have that little cap there, and then your system will update. Otherwise, it's gonna be a problem. Okay, so now we have updated, but I also have to do a global update in AWS CDK, which is npm install -g aws -cdk. So let me just do that real quick. Cool, so now we have updated our stuff. Now, but we have nothing to deploy because I've not written code. In the next tutorial, definitely we'll be looking into code. But this is not all. We gotta do a bootstrap. Now, what is a bootstrap? When you bootstrap, it simply is all about CDK registering your a folder, or sorry, not a folder, but S3 bucket in your AWS account, so that they can store assets or configurations when need be. Now, this is common. Let's say if you're dealing with Terraform, you have the TF state, because if you are working on an infrastructure and it needs to be shared among a team of developers, you need to save a common state or common configurations file somewhere, right? So for AWS CDK, it is within this S3 bucket. And let me just do a bootstrap real quick. I've done my Bootstrap already, so but I'm just gonna show you the code. It's not that difficult. CDK. What do we have here? CDK bootstrap -- profile, and then you have your profile identifier. Now, if your default profile is to your default AWS account, and you don't really need this -- profile. But for myself, because my computer at this point has different is linked to different AWS accounts, I need to actually define the AWS account that I care about. So at this point, I will put down my account, right? Essentially right here, I think my little camera is blocking the page. Give me a second real quick. Now, because my system has already been done, it's bootstrapping to that environment. There are no changes. Now let me show you what happens. Let me bring you to the S3 bucket. As you can see right here, I have a lot of buckets. I'm going to blank out the buckets that they are not supposed to be exposed because they are personal. But you can see here at US East 2, I'm using US East 2 at this point. CDK Toolkit staging bucket. So this is the folder, sorry, not a folder, bucket, S3 bucket that contains all your configurations files or any assets, basically. Configuration files are just too generic. It might not be configuration files, but it's just any assets that needs to be stored so that CDK can remember the state. This is where it's stored into CDK Toolkit -- staging bucket, and then you have a very unique identifier. It will use that, and then right now there's nothing, for crying out loud. But if it needs be, there will be files inside. Now, this is a very good way to test if your CDK initialization work. Basically, unless you have an existing account and you want to test if your API, your secret ID is correct, your secret string is correct, doing Bootstrap allows you to be assured that your CDK is linked to the correct AWS account, correct region. This is how you should prepare your AWS CDK before deploying any code whatsoever. Alright, so this is a very brief breakdown of how CDK works. Not too much action here. The next section, we will talk about deploying S3, and following up, I will talk about a project that we can undertake together so that we can really see AWS CDK in action with some little code here and there. I'll not be teaching too much coding, but I will be talking about certain highlight points that you can bring home and use. Alright, so that's all folks. My name is Jonathan, and I will see you guys next time for another video.